Most of us will have a connection somewhere in our lineage of people who have fought for our country. I have a number of connections myself. My father went through the compulsory military training that people of his age did. And while there, he discovered that he was a very good shot. In fact, one of the best in the country. And he developed a real passion for guns. When we were kids and we had an engineering business, he actually had a gunsmith hiring out part of the workshop, and I got for all sorts of weaponry, including some very ancient ones where you had to load the ball and shot and everything into it. During his life, there's a period where he had over 100 guns that he had collected. We had a firing range down at work where we could fire pistols and rifles and that sort of thing. Denise got to try firing a Magnum 44 just to see what that felt like. And because of Dad's particular set of skills, in the late 50s, he went overseas on a covert mission with a team from the country here, and we didn't get to hear much about that till later in life, and he told us a few stories, and they're not really appropriate for this sort of setting. But when he came back, he married my mother at the age of 21, and he struggled getting through a lot of that things, and his coping mechanism was that he would go bush. And sometimes he wouldn't tell anyone, he'd just disappear for a couple of weeks. And it was his way of processing and working through some of the things that he experienced while he was overseas. And he did process that, and he was a fantastic father, and I really appreciate the upbringing I had through both my father and mother. Also had two uncles, Arnold and Wilfred, who served in World War II. One of them was in the Air Force, one of them in the Navy. I'm sure they had good discussions comparing the two services. And my grandfather, who passed away just before I was born and I was named after, he fought in World War I, and he got severely affected by mustard gas and had significantly decreased lung capacity for the rest of his life till he passed away. And these, people like this, who, and I'm sure we all know people who have fought for our nation and for the world and for the peace, and they sacrificed a lot so that we can experience a better life. And during this weekend, we have the Poppy that we remember, and I thought it would be, people might be just a little bit interested in some of the history of the Poppy. The red or Flanders poppy has been linked with battlefield deaths since the Great War of 1914 to 1918. It was one of the first plants to grow and bloom on battlefields in the Belgian region of Flanders. The connection was made most famously by a Canadian medical officer, Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, in his poem In Flanders Fields, and I'll just read the poem. In Flanders fields the poppies blow between the crosses row on row that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly. Scarce heard amid the guns below, we are the dead, short days ago. We lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe, to you from failing hands we throw, the torch be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields. And an American lady who read this poem took up the thought that we wouldn't break faith, and she took the poppy and used that as a symbol in America for remembering those who had fallen in battle. And then a French lady who was speaking at a armed services conference saw that and took it back to France, and it became very quickly a worldwide symbol for remembrance. And from 1920, that has been the case. And we, in New Zealand, we also had someone come out and got us on board with that, and we ordered, and that Remembrance Day worldwide is November the 11th, which was Armistice Day. In New Zealand, we ordered a heap of poppies to come out and use as a means of fundraising, and they didn't arrive on time. So we shifted from using the poppy on Armistice Day and put it onto Anzac Day. So we're a little bit different to the rest of the world, which is not unusual for Kiwis. And from 1922 through to now, the poppy has been used on the Anzac weekend by Kiwis to remember those who have fallen and to raise money for returned servicemen who need assistance. And on that first time in 1922, we raised the equivalent of $1.3 million by selling poppies, and have continued to do so ever since. So if you see someone on the street, I went to Bakerman's for lunch yesterday, which I do occasionally. I enjoy that bakery, and there was a person outside there with poppies and a thing. So I went and gave a donation and took a poppy as we remember those that have fallen and support those who are still here. Was that of interest and helpful? Those who went before sacrificed so that we could be free. And I guess today, when we've lived for decades in relative peace, it's easy for us to forget that the peace that we live in was hard fought for. That there are those who have sacrificed, and some make the ultimate sacrifice so that we can actually have a better life here today. Currently there are people who sacrifice their own wants and needs so that we and our children can have a better future. The most recent conflict we've been involved in before this year was in Afghanistan, where 10 Kiwis lost their lives. Currently we've just sent 50 people to Ukraine, and don't be surprised if we send a few more. If you listen to geopolitical experts, this war isn't going away anytime soon. And the landscape of the world has changed. We have lived decades in recent times in a really privileged time of life. But the world has changed. The world has changed. And in fact, the geopolitical experts are predicting that there will be a severe famine throughout the world because of this war. Not just because Russia is the world's largest wheat producer and Ukraine is the 5th largest, which there'll be no wheat from Ukraine this year, but also because Russia is one of the largest exporters of fertilizer. And countries like China, which have bad soil, won't be getting fertilizer this year for growing their food, and there'll be a worldwide shortage of food everywhere. And so what that will mean for us in New Zealand is don't be surprised if food prices double in the next 12 months. My suggestion is, if you have any land at all, a veggie garden could be a good idea. And I think, Don, God led inspirational stuff to see us having a community garden in the church, because it will be sorely needed. And the ones who will suffer will be the poor. The ones who will suffer will be the poor. Anyway, that is completely off track. But so at this time we remember those who've served in the armed forces. But there's also others who really sacrifice quite significantly so that we can have better lives. And there are other services which occur as well, which I think it's worth acknowledging at this time. People in the medical profession, doctors and nurses is one which Some of them sacrifice their lives incredibly. Our future daughter-in-law is a midwife, and some of the hours she has to work and the things she has to do is just phenomenal. A few years ago, I had a significant accident when I was mountain biking, and I spent a few nights in hospital and a few months recovering. But one of the people I'd really like to honour is Nae Naomi Watts. She was nursing at the same ward that I happened to be in, and I got to see her at work. And she is incredible. The guy in bed beside me was the one that Naomi was looking after, and she would come in, and it was like, you could see that he was experiencing that he was her total focus, that he was just incredibly important to her. And yet while she was making him feel that way, she was carrying out tasks in such an efficient and effective manner and getting them all done. And it was just, I enjoy watching operations. Being in business, it's one of the things I do. I'll go into a cafe or something and I'll see what's going on and just assessing, is this a good business or not? And Naomi was fantastic. She was very, very good. And, she sacrificed herself time-wise. She's gone overseas and nursed in war zones. She's spent some time in Starship Hospital because she's just willing to make other people's lives better. And then we've got police, fire, those in teaching professions. They will sacrifice a lot of their own time they don't get paid for, just so that people going ahead of them can have a better life. Would you agree? And fighting for world peace isn't the only battle going on within this planet. There is also a fight for God's kingdom and for his authority to be established. And there are those who have gone before us who have sacrificed much so that we and those who come after us can live better lives. And interestingly, in the book of Hebrews, there's a section which talks about a lot of those who have gone before us. And in fact, it's like the Old Testament all condensed down into miniature. So this morning I want to read a reasonable amount of scripture. We're going to read all of Hebrews 11 and part of Hebrews 12 this morning. And Hebrews 11 is often called the faith chapter because it does emphasise the importance of faith, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I also like to think of it as the chapter of heroes. So starting from verse 1 of chapter 11. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. The first hero. By faith Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith Abel still speaks even though he is dead. By faith Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. By faith Noah, when warned about things not yet seen in holy fear, built an ark to save his family. By his faith he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. By faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went even though he did not know where he was going. By faith he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. He was looking forward. I think it is popular today with preaching and teaching often to focus on what we can get now. And it's, we live a little bit in or quite a lot perhaps, in a consumer society, and even that does come across in church preaching a little bit, that we actually talk a lot about our needs, our wants, our desires. But there is a bigger picture. I'm a big believer in going after God's promises for our lives. I do it all the time. And God will have promises for every one of us that He's given us. Some of them are general promises that we can leave, and some of them are specific promises for each one of us, and we can go after those. But even if they don't happen, there is a bigger promise out there of a future that we're all going for, that we're all building towards, that is growing God's kingdom and seeing eternity as the objective that we can have. And like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who went to the burning fire, they said, look, God is able to deliver us, but even if He doesn't, we will still trust God and we'll press on because we know there is a bigger picture. And this is being a little bit annoying. Verse 11, and by faith even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. And I think that is a key thing. When Abraham's situation looked hopeless from a human perspective. He was too old to have kids. Sarah was too old to have kids. And yet God did the possible out of the impossible. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. He was looking ahead to his reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who was invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover and the application of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land, but when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. By the faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient, And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of the lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. There were others who were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. Say that with me. The world was not worthy of them. Now try this. The world is not worthy of me. Some of you might find that just a little bit awkward to say. I just want to comment on this a little bit, because as interesting as we go through that list of heroes from the Old Testament, there is no mention of their faults and failings. Apart from maybe Abel and Enoch, you go through all the others, and if you read the story in the Old Testament, you will find that they were far from perfect people. They made mistakes, they got it wrong, and yet it's not mentioned in their hero list. And sometimes I think we can sit there and think, well, we're not actually doing that great, we're making these mistakes, we're getting it wrong, we're not quite doing everything that God wants us to do. But if we're living by faith, 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 we are in the hero list. The world is not worthy of us. There is a place built for us that we get to go to, that Des gets to go to. Do you like that thought? They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and in holes in the ground. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better all for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. You know, God has a bigger plan. He has a better plan. You know, you'll have people who like these heroes that we listed, like people who have served in the armed forces. You'll have people who have gone before you, who have actually influenced you and your future. People who we really should honour for what they've done, and actually setting things up so that we can have a better life and have a better life. One of the stories that Mum used to share with us when we were young was about one of her uncles. Our heritage, we came into Nelson in 1842. You can find our names on the monuments along the waterfront there where they have that. And we largely all lived in what is now known as Edify. Before that was Todd's Valley, and before that it was Norriss Valley. I think there's only about one bit of section that the Norriss families didn't own. The house that Mum grew up is still there. Grew up and is still there. It's changed a lot. It's a little bit like an axe. It's had 5 new handles and 4 new heads, that sort of thing. It's still the same axe. The walls of the room that she grew up in were of clay. It's not clay anymore. So one of her uncles milked cows, had cows that he milked, and during the Depression, that's how he made his money. He'd sell milk, and during the Depression, people couldn't afford to buy it. And she'd say that when there are kids involved, he would just give them the milk. He couldn't bear to let children go without nourishment. And there's lots of stories like that we heard growing up, which just build into your life, realizing that actually other people are important. There's more to life than what I want. There's more to life than what I need. And it's stories and people like that actually build into your life. My brother Tony, 4 years older than me, he became a Christian before I did, and he was at, we were typical brothers. And I'm amazed that he decided to take me to youth group when I turned to the age of 13. We would fight and get on with all these sorts of things, and yet he was willing to have his younger, annoying brother come to youth group with him. And it was because of that at the age of 13, at a Youth for Christ rally at the town hall in Christchurch, that I gave my life to the Lord, and I've followed him ever since. And I honour my brother for paying that small sacrifice of taking me along to youth group. And there are myriad of people who have invested in me over the years that have made a difference and influence, and there will be many people who have invested in your life as well. And have you honoured them? Have you thanked them? I was getting taught once on one of the keys to happiness, and there's a few things that you can do that actually have been scientifically shown to make you a more happy person. And one of the activities that you can do is you can write a letter for someone that has had influenced your life and honour them, and then take them out for coffee and read them the letter, assuming that they're still alive. If they're not, then it's a cheaper cafe experience. But and people who do that have been scientifically shown to be more happy. So just take that on board. Have you honoured people who have invested into your life? So let's carry on a little bit into chapter 12. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, do you know that there are in heaven that you are being watched? There are those who have gone before who are just witnessing all the great things, the awesome things, the fantastic things that you are doing in the power of God as you walk by faith. Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us persevere, friends. Let's keep focused. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, which is our fourth focus point for this year as a church. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, making sure that we're looking forward, investing into the future. The pioneer and perfecter of faith, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. If we stay focused on the here and now, I think we can become discouraged. I think we can become dry, disheartened. But if we keep that eternal focus, if we realize that there is a bigger picture at play, if we realize that we're actually investing into the future for our children, for our children's children, for nations, it'll keep that joy. It'll keep that joy going. Just as Jesus was willing to suffer the cross because he knew on the other side that there was a joy worth having, a joy of seeing us with him. And if the band wants to come up, we'll jump to verse 18 of chapter 12. You have not come to a mountain that can be touched and that is burning with fire, to darkness, gloom, and storm, which was referring to when Moses was up the mountain, to a trumpet blast, or to such a voice speaking words that those who heard it begged that no further word be spoken to them, because they could not bear what was commanded. If even an animal touches the mountain, it must be stoned to death. The sight was so terrifying that Moses said, "I am trembling with fear." But you, that is us, that is we, have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church, which is us, of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God, the judge of all, to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. In verse 28, therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. Friends, there are people who've invested in you, and your life is better because of it, and we can honour those. As I finish, who are you investing in? What are you investing in? Are you just focused on the here and now and your needs and your wants? Or do you have an eternal view? Do you realize that there are those that are coming after you that you will influence and make a difference in? I suspect for most of us, we can say yes to that. Let's stand and worship our awe-inspiring God, who is a consuming fire.